Noah Garcia here at the Whittwood Public Library, where Majority Leader Ian Calderon will be answering the questions from the community. As the representative of the 57th Assembly District and the Assembly Majority Leader, Calderon put forth this forum for his constituents to have a live platform to voice their concerns and to discuss pressing topics affecting California.
My name is Ian Calderon, and I'm the representative in the California State Assembly for the 57th Assembly District. I represent a little under 500,000 people. I was elected in 2012. I'm the very first millennial ever elected to the California State Legislature. and I currently serve as the Majority Leader of the California State Assembly, and I am the youngest Majority Leader in the history of the state of California. My job is basically to work with my colleagues in the Assembly, in the Senate, as well as the Governor to try and pass policy here in the state of California. It is the duty of the House as well as the Senate to write bills and to vote on bills. If these bills get through both of our houses, they go to the governor signs it, and becomes a law. The issues that we are really facing here in the state of California, what are the goals and the priorities? Now, the problem that we've had is that these problems have been ignored for so long, they've become really hot button issues, really difficult issues to try and navigate. And so the importance doesn't change, but the ability for in which that we can get these things done and these problems solved is extremely difficult. And so we recognize very early on that we may have to do a lot of things that at first may be unpopular, but in time was the right thing to do down the road, because we're trying to focus on our state's fiscal health. We've had a balanced budget every year that since I've been in the legislature. But still, there's a lot of challenges that we face as a. And so when you have legislators that are more concerned about their political hit, they're not going to want to put themselves in that position, especially because they know that in a very short period of time, they're going to be wanting to run for a different office. And so since it became so political, we essentially in the state stopped increasing the amount of money that we collected through the gas tax to be able to keep up with things like inflation because it was political. And so when we got elected, what we tried to do is figure out, okay, how are we going to solve this need? This is a huge problem. Understand, for me to vote no on this tax increase was politically beneficial to me. It was an easier decision for me to not support this. But in my heart, I knew it's not the right thing to do, because the problem only gets worse. And so we voted and we passed the gas tax. And it was signed into law. And now a couple of things during this conversation, as it usually does, it becomes political. And I will say this, what I really hate about politics today and about our political discourse is that we allow words, climate change, other things like this, they become politicized. And it's no longer about whatever this actual issue is and what the problems are and how we solve that. Now it becomes about Democrat versus Republican, right versus left, red versus blue, and that is so detrimental to our civic institutions and to our communities, because it's no longer about settling these issues and actually finding solutions to make things better. It's about why the other side sucks. It's about why they're the bad ones, why they're the ones we need to fight against, and it's just like, it's ridiculous. And I will tell you this, I'm just curious. In terms of percentages, who thinks that they can guess the percentage on how many times Democrats and Republicans in the state of California actually agree and vote on the same issues? Who thinks they can guess? Throw out a percentage.
15. 47. 2.
Okay. 80%. 80% of the time we are voting on the same issues and supporting the same issues, Democrats and Republicans. 80% of the time. But it doesn't matter that that's the case in California, because our politics are usually dictated by what's happening in Washington, D.C. And so we have one-time projects that we will do that are general obligation bonds, that we take out money, we borrow money in order to do specific transportation projects. So for budgeting purposes, because it's easier, what we'll do is we'll take general fund money and we'll pay down the debt on those general obligation bonds, transportation projects. And then we'll take transportation money that's garnered through things like the gas tax to reimburse the general fund. So they're saying, well, you're stealing. You're stealing transportation funds for the general fund. No, we're not. We're paying the state back out of transportation funds for funds that we use to pay down transportation projects. debt that we took out to do transportation projects. And go to here, half, maybe 3/4 of it goes to there, and the other half or 3/4 or other half or a quarter goes somewhere else. And so if we're going to do something, it has to go to exactly what we're saying it's going to go, because we have to rebuild people's trust in our ability to properly use the money where we say it's going to be used. And so to double down on that, we did a constitutional amendment to be placed on the ballot that you all have an opportunity to vote on this November. And what it basically says is that any money that is gathered through these transportation funds has to go directly to transportation projects and transportation projects alone. Now, we could have done this on our own, but just know this, if we did it, we can change it. So what we do is if we place it on the ballot, you put that change in place. We can't change it as the legislature, only the voters can change it. So our proposition on this year's ballot is going to basically be locking in all transportation funds specific to transportation projects. Next, I want to talk a little bit about housing. So what we did this last year is we recognize we're in a housing crisis in the state of California. This is too expensive. It is too expensive to afford housing. And a big reason as to why it's too expensive is we don't have the supply. And so when you have a lack of supply but a high demand, that cost of housing skyrockets. The $4 billion bond, everybody's going to have an opportunity to vote on in November. So this will be on the ballot, and the legislature put this on the ballot. It's $4 billion, $1 billion of which goes specifically to homeless veterans housing, because we have the highest homeless veterans rate than any other state. That's something we're not proud of. And so we're dedicating $1 billion of the $4 billion specifically to homeless veterans housing. But essentially, the way we can make a difference is to try and do offset for costs for builders, and so that they can build an affordable house. The reason why they don't build affordable housing is because they don't feel like once the project's said and done, they can sell it at an affordable rate and make enough money in order for that project to be worth it. And so what we try to do is offset on the state level through things like bonds to make it as affordable for them to try to build affordable housing. Is public safety bill. And so basically this bill was, I mean, in response to, but also something I have been looking at with regards to public safety in our communities. And so when we lost one of our own in Whittier, Officer Boyer, I decided to speed up the process in which we decided to introduce this bill. There's never been an audit to determine the efficacy of our rehabilitation programs, and so that means we don't really know if they're working or not, but we dedicate over $300 million a year towards those programs, and so I think that's unfortunate. I think that's wrong, and so that's why I'm going to put forward the request to do an audit of the CDCR so that we know what is working, what's not working, and focus more on what is actually working.
When the floor became open to questions from the audience, people's concerns ranged from the questionable position of California's bullet train, the state's cooperation with ICE, and the real estate influence on the housing market. All of these, however, were being overshadowed by the concerns of the AB 1884 bill, the Calderon-led bill, publicly recognized as the straw tax.
So who remembers when we were going through a drought that it became an executive order by the governor that if you went into a dine-in restaurant, if you wanted a glass of water, you could have a glass of water, you just had to ask for it.
But you weren't going to be fined. You go to jail.
Actually, there were $500 fines associated with that.
Yeah.
So, just hold on. I'm telling you, the reality is far less exciting than it's been proposed to you. It's ridiculous. That is not what I'm doing. That is not the point of the bill. That is not what the bill is going to do. No server will be affected by this bill. Nobody's going to go to jail because of this bill. But it really addresses a big problem. And I will say this at the outset, that just because something may not be important to us or maybe not be important to you doesn't make it unimportant. And so what we have is a single-use plastics crisis. We have a single-use plastics crisis. These are non-biodegradable substances that end up in our environment and are there forever. They get into our landfills. We have one, Hacienda Heights, that's still there. Tons of plastic that's in there that will never go away. It will never go there. It will be there forever. They get into our waterways and they get into the ocean.